Oblivion is a game that has tormented me for years. For a long time, I had no desire to play it or complete it, as I'd think to myself, if I want to play some Elder Scrolls, I'd rather just play the more modern Skyrim or the deeper and more robust RPG systems of Morrowind, instead of this awkward middle child of a game. However, I'd see all the love this game gets from fans and critics all over the internet, so I still had a desire to dive in and see what they saw in this game. And through my most recent playthrough, I'm happy to report that I have finally seen the light of Oblivion. And I gotta say, for a game that came out in 2006, this thing is insanely impressive. The world is massive and vertical, even being slightly bigger than Skyrim's game world, and even having more marked locations, I believe. Giving you forts, camps, ruins from both man and mer, caves, mines, farms, inns, and 8 full cities to visit. Cyrodiil has some impressively large and detailed cities for the time, and the Imperial City is still an iconic and extremely thick place. I mean, sure, it's broken up across like 9 loading zones, but for the time and technology, I don't think we could have gotten a better Imperial City to explore. However, as time has passed, Oblivion is really starting to show its age. The distant lands look chunky, blurry, and undetailed, and the maximum draw distance falls off about a stone's throw in front of your view, and the line between where the detail starts and stops is pretty stark and noticeable. Some models and textures look absolutely cooked, and don't even get me started on the NPCs, who, funnily enough, are one of Oblivion's best features. Oblivion NPCs are legendarily hideous, and even if you aren't an Elder Scrolls fan whatsoever, you've definitely seen some memes and videos about the goofy-ass Oblivion NPC faces and dialogue, and the goofy shit that their Radiant AI compels them to do.
Snow. We need more snow. Can't have enough snow.
Indeed.
Look out!
Yes, I'm sure you've got something exceedingly important to say. I'm the only one left. The necromancers retreated further in, but we've got to follow them. There's no time to waste. Follow me.
The humans in this game look like ugly clay models at best, and deformed bird monsters at worst. And don't even get me started on the elves, who look like colorfully mutated versions of the already ugly humans, and their tilted eyes and elongated faces make them downright offensive to look at sometimes. And the beast races, dear God.
I have seen abominations walk this earth.
But this hideousness and goofiness is all the price of innovation, as Oblivion is attempting to make its NPCs as close to real-life people as possible. One of my biggest issues with Morrowind's NPCs, go watch that video if you haven't, it's pretty good, I promise, was how static they were. Morrowind NPCs felt less like people and more like menus attached to a mortal coil. NPCs were either limited to milling around aimlessly or just standing in one spot as if they were permanently nailed down to the spot they're standing on. So to innovate on their NPC systems, Bethesda created the Radiant AI system. The idea of Radiant AI was to make each NPC their own unique person per se, with a full schedule. NPCs would now eat, sleep, and go to their jobs, like a real person would. Businesses and guilds would no longer be open 24 hours a day, Morndos to Sundos like in Morrowind, as the NPCs wouldn't be nailed to the floor behind the shop counter, they'd be back in their homes or at the inn eating. Not only would they have these unique schedules, but they would also have a unique reputation with the player, similar to Morrowind. But thanks to the modern face-gen technology, you'll be able to tell which NPCs like you or not just from how they look at you. If an NPC likes you, they'll look at you with this dopey grin on their face, and if they hate you, they will scowl angrily at you. But this system gets betrayed by that same face-gen technology, as their deformed homunculus faces will look so damn ridiculous with such a stupid smile or grimace on their face, you won't be able to take any NPC seriously. For example, during the main quest, I had accidentally killed a Waynon Priory NPC who ran in front of me during a battle, which the game registered as a murder, getting me arrested when I met the nearest guard, and I had to spend some time in the can.
Go away.
And when I got out, my murder had made Martin and Joffrey seemingly hate me, so I had the 2 main characters of the main quest scowling at me like they wanted me shot dead in the street like a dog. It was pretty hilarious. The important NPCs can't be persuaded either, so they were stuck scowling at me like this for the rest of the story. Speaking of persuasion, you can persuade NPCs like in Morrowind, but instead of it just being a raw dice roll, there's now this whole persuasion minigame where you pick 1 of 4 persuasion types from a spinning wheel of pizza-like triangles, and to be honest, I have no clue how this wheel is supposed to properly work, and I never invested in personality skills in Elder Scrolls games. And I only ran into 1 or 2 occasions where I actually needed to raise an NPC's reputation to advance a quest, and you can still use bribes or spells to raise reputations instead of messing with the pizza wheel game. So you can ignore this minigame as much as you desire. I respect Bethesda for trying to make the NPCs this dynamic, but the complexity of this Radiant AI system made the NPCs show up and start dialogue in unexpected locations.
I don't really feel comfortable talking to you right now.
Have nonsensical conversations with each other.
The feedback isn't fancy, but it fills you up. They sure do sell food. Yep, you can buy food there.
And NPCs may even end up getting killed by guards as their Radiant AI tells them to rob another NPC in broad daylight in front of one. But this goofy Radiant behavior makes the NPCs much more enjoyable to interact with and observe. And it's even a bit endearing to me, as without this system, the NPCs would be these static, boring, and extremely ugly abominations of Akatosh. And this system has also given us memes for over 17 years. And for that, I'm glad it exists. It's a unique mechanic that really makes Oblivion stand out in the series. For better, and for worse.
Stop! Thief! Luther Broad's boarding house.
And it's unfortunate the NPCs were reined in for Skyrim, as they opted to just say fuck it and throw out the whole system, losing that uniquely ugly charm that only Oblivion NPCs have. Not only do the NPCs have these new capabilities and new dynamic lives, they're also now fully voiced, marking a pretty big change from Morrowind's text-based dialogue systems. And this voice dialogue is on full display from the jump, as after you create your abomination from the depths of Oblivion, the first thing that happens to you is the Dunmer from across the cell block will verbally berate your character for getting arrested and how you're gonna die alone in prison. 17 years later, and I still don't know what this guy's fucking problem is. You then meet Emperor Uriel Septim VII himself, who's famously voiced by Patrick Stewart, and Bethesda is really flexing their fully voiced character system. Oblivion has a bit of a star-studded cast, with Patrick Stewart, Sean Bean as Martin Septim, and Terrence Stamp as Mankar Cameron. Even Todd Howard's central voice is in this game.
What? That really pisses me off.
However, it seems that they blew all their voice acting money on getting these guys, as outside of them, the voice cast is very limited, with about 2 voices for each race, one for males and one for females. And you'll be hearing the same voices come out of multiple different NPCs. Now don't get me wrong, the voice acting is good. Guys like Wes Johnson have a great voice and energy, but he has a very distinct voice, and my immersion definitely took a hit from each Imperial having the exact same voice. But like Morrowind's dialogue system, you'll adjust to it fast, and you're just gonna have to accept that the residents of Cyrodiil only have 6 possible voices. This voice dialogue also comes at a cost of less robust NPC dialogue, and your conversation topics are much more limited from Morrowind. And you're usually only able to ask any given NPC about rumors, the city they're living in, or any quest-related topics they might have. It's a bit of a downgrade, but also, thanks to the addition of quest markers and full fast travel, you simply don't need to talk to NPCs about the locations of certain people or places, as it's all clearly marked on your map, and you can travel to and fro at any time, so there's just simply no need for detailed directions. And most of your traversal will boil down to seeing where your marker is pointing you towards, and teleporting to the nearest location, and then beelining it to the marker. And thanks to these new additions, the design of Cyrodiil is much more fast and loose than Vvardenfell, and its tightly designed roadways, travel systems, and cavern and dungeon placements give way to huge open fields, large sloping hills, and lots of randomly placed trees and rocks. And all you need to do to find your destination is follow the compass, and occasionally check the map to gauge your distance to your destination. Unfortunately, at least for me, outside of the cities, and some cool looking distant mountain peaks, Cyrodiil doesn't make much of an impression. It doesn't have your epic mountainous scenery of Skyrim, or the alien and ash-covered lands of Vvardenfell. Cyrodiil mostly looks like your typical European countryside, filled with lush forests, rolling hills, and some distant mountains, but it's still mostly a sloped, green expanse of purling noise-generated hills. And this is mostly due to the technical limitations of the gaming hardware at the time, and these technical limitations even forced the lore to change, as before Oblivion came out, Cyrodiil is always described as a thick jungle by NPCs and in pocket guides to the Empire books. And I assume it would be much harder to get a thick jungle setting up and running on a base Xbox 360, so it was changed to be a more temperate, modest, and console-friendly setting. And the lore was retconned so that either the White Gold Tower itself reshaped the land, or Tiber Septim used his chim to open up the game console and turn Cyrodiil from a jungle to a forest when he ascended to godhood. And I would definitely be more into the jungled setting, as it would provide opportunities for some awesome jungle ruins to explore, and some pretty weird creatures to fight, and that would be on top of a more visually interesting area of a fantasy jungle. But I totally understand going for the less graphically intensive forest. Also, the music is elite, as always, and you'll be hearing it all throughout this video in the background. Jeremy Soule returns with even more bangers, and there are now dedicated tracks themed for towns and dungeons that were sorely missing in Morrowind, giving Oblivion much more musical variety. And this shit is serene. It's gorgeous. But back to the story. We follow Uriel and his Blade security detail until they tell us to fuck off, and we enter a tutorial cave to get acclimated with the different types of combat in the game, and to get our feet wet with the updated combat mechanics. Oblivion takes a huge departure from Morrowind, as hit and cast chance have been completely removed, which is probably the Elder Scrolls' biggest step away from its TTRPG roots. As long as your weapon overlaps with an enemy, you'll score a hit, and you can now cast spells with 100% efficacy, as long as you have enough magicka, of course. Oblivion's combat is now much more focused on positioning and timing, rather than its brother Morrowind, whose combat is pretty much solely pinned on your attributes and derived skills, although Oblivion still bases all your damage output on these values. Since hit chance isn't a thing anymore, skills now increase your damage rather than just hit chance, and your goal is to maximize your numbers in your attack method of choice, through skill ups and general level ups, which, quick note, is a fucking mess in this game, but I'll get to that. Enemies have a surprising amount of strategy to their attacks, as they're able to anticipate your attacks and block your swings, flee and reposition to cast spells, and will wait you out if you try blocking before they attack. The same goes for the player, of course, and you can time blocks to stagger opponents, or you can just simply backpedal to dodge attacks if you catch one in time. And it's designed this way so you can't just mindlessly mash left mouse button to cut through all your enemies. Now this all sounds great on paper, but in practice, the combat system of Oblivion can get very bouncy. And when it's bouncy, it's unsatisfying and frustrating. And this frustration all comes down to fatigue and staggering. Since hit chance is gone, what is fatigue supposed to do now? Well, it affects how much damage your melee attacks do, and every flick of the wrist will drain it a little bit. But at least running won't drain your fatigue anymore. Now it'll just slow its recovery. If you run out of fatigue in a fight, your swings will start doing pitiful amounts of damage, and your enchanted glass claymore will turn from a sword into a damn pool noodle right before your eyes, which is suboptimal for a game where many enemies can be absolute oceans of health, especially the level enemies that crop up later on in your playthrough. I was fighting for my damn life against headless dread zombies that could recover their health as fast as I could damage them. The scaling in this game is a trip. But the worst aspect of this game's melee combat is that it's always trying to wrestle away control from the player. Enemies are always looking to block, and if you swing into a blocking enemy, your sword will bounce off of them, and you'll be unable to attack for around 3 seconds as your 100 strength character will have to struggle to regain their balance after a sorcerer full parried and brushed off a two-handed claymore swing with a dagger. And many enemies won't provide clear visual feedback that they're blocking, or they'll block at the last possible second, at an almost impossibly perfect timing. And if this game decides that an enemy has hit you hard enough, you'll get staggered and have to wait a few more seconds for your character to recover from the hit. And enemies can chain these staggers too, and you may be forced to take several consecutive hits as you stagger backwards for 5 seconds straight. And you can even be staggered through blocks if their attack is juicy enough. This forces the player to be more strategic with their attacks, and to not just endlessly assault your opponents. But it also makes the combat feel extremely bouncy and janky, and no matter what you do, try mastering positioning, try keeping your fatigue bar full at all times, or even max out your agility stat. It doesn't matter. The staggers will come regardless. And you will be getting blocked and staggered a lot if you go for a melee character. It's just inevitable. And many enemies have really quick attacks, so get ready to stumble. However, Oblivion's combat is at its absolute worst when engaging multiple enemies. It's a total wash. And group fights usually go like this. Multiple enemies will bum rush you, and when you try to swing at them, it's very likely that your sword will hit through multiple NPCs. And if one is blocking, and at least one probably is, you will get parried and momentarily staggered from the block, allowing the group of enemies to wail on you for free. And group fights almost always devolved into just taking power swing potshots at the group, and then running away to try to recover and regain your positioning. And it is simply ass. I had at least invested heavily into endurance to get an ocean of health of my own, as otherwise I'd be cooked in these group fights. They'll just pile on the punishment. And this goes for friendly NPC groups too, and they just love to run right in between you and an enemy, and I've pissed off several NPCs by accidentally hitting them when they ran in between me and the enemy I'm fighting. And you can't surrender to them either. You have to use your chim to reload that save if you want the NPC to forgive you. And group fights are the scariest damn thing in the game. But outside of these issues I have, the combat mostly gets the job done well enough. Oblivion's combat has a much slower pace than Morrowind and Skyrim. Hits to and from enemies are pretty weak overall due to everyone in Cyrodiil being a health sponge with a noodle arm, and every fight feels like a complete encounter, and it's rare to run into absolute fodder enemies like weak wolves and brittle skeletons that you can body in just 1 or 2 swings like in Morrowind or Skyrim. Quite the opposite actually. These Cyrodiilian skeletons have been drinking their milk. Jesus. I like the idea of a more strategic combat system that encourages mechanical skills for timing and positioning on top of the raw number crunching gameplay. But the blocking and staggering mechanics are so frustrating and unsatisfying to experience in a fight, and can make some encounters really rage-inducing at times. But it's at least fun to pull off disarming strikes and knockdown swings. But even the power attacks feel awkward and clunky, and pulling off a back power swing was hard as hell to do. I usually back too far away to hit the enemy, and it's a bit difficult to gauge how far your sword can reach. Also, chop, thrust, and stab swing types have been removed as weapon attributes, and they have seemingly been relegated to directional power attacks. But the damage remains uniform across all swing types. Instead, these directional power attacks now have unlockable perks, such as being able to disarm an enemy with a power slash, or knock down or paralyze an enemy with a power thrust to add some extra dynamics and some extra added strategy to some fights. But overall, it's a solid design scheme with some very, very clunky execution. And as you fight and level up your major skills, you'll eventually be able to level up, which you can only do now by sleeping in a bed, which is a nice addition, and it lets you have more control of when you level up than in, say, Morrowind. However, Oblivion's leveling system is flawed down to its most fundamental levels, so much so that there's no one best way to fix it, and you have to kind of pick your poison on this one. So remember how Morrowind had very little level scaling, which was pretty much reserved only for overworld enemies? Well, Oblivion goes in the complete opposite direction, and almost every aspect of this game's design is based around your level and scaling. From the enemies you encounter, the gear they use, your quest rewards, the items you find in dungeons, and even the amount of gold you find or rewarded for quests are now all based on level scaled values. So your current level is extremely important as to how strong you can be and how much game content you can have access to. This is all fine and dandy, but if you play the game normally and are leveling up when you get the opportunity to do so, you're just asking to get jobbed later on down the line. Oblivion retains its attribute leveling system, where you can increase 3 attributes by up to 5 points based on if you train 10 levels in the skills those attributes govern, i.e., you can add plus 5 strength if you leveled up Blade 10 times in a level. And as you level, so do the enemies, becoming stronger alongside you, and newer, more powerful enemies will start rearing their ugly heads. And if you haven't been efficiently leveling, you're in for a rough time, as these enemies start getting pretty damn powerful. Skeletons and zombies start getting insane amounts of health, and large enemies that can stagger your ass in the next sundas like ogres and minotaurs start cropping up. And if you haven't been plus 5ing your attributes every level, you're pretty much cooked, as those plus 1 or plus 2 attribute ups won't make you that much stronger at all. You'll feel like a coughing baby trying to take on a hydrogen bomb. So, that leaves you with 4 options. You can either 1. Play the game normally, but be forced to turn down the difficulty slider to adjust to the increasingly jacked enemies. 2. Not level up at all, keeping you strong against most enemies, but also keeps you from encountering higher level monsters and getting better gear that only spawns at higher levels. 3. You can try what's called efficient leveling, keeping a spreadsheet of all the stats you need to increase, while avoiding leveling skills you don't intend to at that time, and essentially play the game in reverse, tagging skills you don't use as major skills, and tagging skills you use all the time as minor skills, turning your Oblivion playthrough into a salaried accounting job. Or 4. Download a mod that gives you plus 5 leveling up always, or a similar mod that does some other rebalancing. And personally, I'd recommend options 1 or 4, as they have the least amount of impact on the core gameplay experience. Not leveling up keeps many enemies and weapon types from appearing in the game, making you miss lots of content, and it will even block you out of most Daedra quests. And efficient leveling is a great way to suck all the fun and enjoyment out of Oblivion and turn it into an Excel desk job, and is probably only for the most dedicated Oblivion players. If anyone has ever completed an efficient leveling playthrough without cracking, let me know. This shit seems like a Sisyphean effort. And for this playthrough, I just downloaded a mod that gave me plus 5 automatically for each attribute I skilled up, which kept me at a pretty good pace with the game, and I never needed to move that difficulty slider from its spot right smack dab in the middle. Unfortunately, this is just some bull jive we gotta deal with to fully enjoy this game, but it's all numbers at the end of the day, and there's no shame to lower the difficulty in a game that's already rigged against you. Once we get through the fairly long tutorial, we link back up with the Emperor and get ambushed by the mythic Dawn, who send Uriel back to the mannequin factory he came from, and we pick our sign and create our class, which is a much more streamlined version of Morrowind's class system. Weapon types have all been compacted into either blade or blunt weapons, and spears have been ejected into the void. Enchanting is now a resource-based mechanic, using sigil stones and soul gems to craft enchanted items. And mysticism has been mauled and is on the verge of death. Levitation, Mark, and Recall have all been cut in favor of the new click-and-go fast travel system, and Unarmored has been cut as a skill as well. Combining the weapon types into either blade or blunt helps streamline the system, and it gives any given Oblivion character access to a wider array of weapons to use. But cutting spears is disappointing no matter how you slice it, and it reduces the motivation to make several different characters that are skilled in different weapon types. But Oblivion's content and factions can be enjoyed all on one character, regardless of their class, so this is more of a preference issue for me. Security is also now tied to a minigame rather than raw dice rolls, and this minigame can be beat by any character with any level of security skill. And with spells like Open Lock still around as alteration spells, security is pretty damn useless as an actual skill. Skills now also provide you with perks at every 25th level, an early form of Skyrim's perk-based progression system. The perks are pretty helpful, like Heavy Armor 100 not affecting your carry weight when you're wearing the armor, or Armor 100 making you a god of smithing. But it takes a while to unlock these perks, and it comes with some brand new issues of its own, like not being able to repair magic gear until you hit an armor level of 50, which will either force you to travel to a smithing merchant that'll charge you a king's ransom for repairs, or pack muling several weapons to swap between when your magical item gets too weak. Oblivion's item durability isn't as brittle as, say, late game Morrowind, but your weapon health goes down faster than you think, and being blocked from repairing your sweet magical sword in the field doesn't really jive with me very well, or with the game's pace. Magic also gets shafted by these perks too, as instead of getting sweet perks that extend their skill systems like acrobatics perks giving you dodge rolls or water jumping, you not only get access to higher tier spells, which spells have now. Speaking of acrobatics, it quickly became my favorite non-combat skill, and I was bunny hopping my ass all over Cyrodiil. It was fun to grind my jump skills to let me jump even higher, and it really made traveling much more enjoyable, as I could jump over and onto rocks, on top of buildings, and I tried to string together parkour jumps to break up the monotony of walking around. And I'm sad to see it go in Skyrim. It would have made traversal way more entertaining. Its only drawback is that it drains your stamina pretty quickly, and you may get caught by an enemy while winded from your bee hopping. But luckily for us, we can still just wait an hour to fully recover our health, magicka, and stamina, which works great to keep Oblivion's pace moving consistently. When making my character, I also invested in destruction and restoration, and magic in Oblivion has gotten some solid change-ups. You no longer need to equip your spellcasting hands to cast. Just press C to cast your currently equipped spell, and you can cast it from anywhere, anytime, even if you have a weapon equipped. It's pretty sweet. And you got your Fortify, Damage, Fire, Frost, and Destruction spells, usual restoration suspects, and the NPC altering illusion spells. Spellmaking makes a return, but is locked behind access to the Arcane University in the Mages Guild questline. Or you can get it early if you have the Frostcrack Spire plugin, and you can make your spells at a spellmaking altar. But this feature doesn't know what's coming. But with that, we finalize our character and head out of the sewers, Amulet of Kings in hand, and we get our step out moment. It's a bit humble of a step out, as you get a view of some hills, a lake, and an island with some alien ruins on it. But it's all about the potential here. We can go wherever we want, and for 2006, this must have been an unreal moment. Games weren't usually this big. But before we left the sewers, we were also told by the Blades to haul our ass over to Wayne and Priory and to speak with Joffrey right away. So I go do that. Joffrey is the leader of the Blades, the Imperial spy faction our sculpted Grandpa Caius worked for, and Joffrey is hiding out as a priest. We find him and tell him that the Emperor is dead, and in his dying breath, he gave us the Amulet of Kings, which is the only thing keeping Oblivion from running a Daedric train on the poor people of Tamriel. Joffrey says something along the lines of, "That's bullshit." But I believe it. And he tells us that if the amulet was lost, and the dragon fires of the Imperial Palace went out, the firmament separating Tamriel and Oblivion will be destroyed, leaving it wide open for conquest. And only someone with the blood of Tiber Septim can wear the amulet and light the dragon fires to keep those nasty-ass Daedra out of Mundus. Unfortunately, all of Uriel's sons were assassinated off-screen by the Mythic Dawn, and it seems we may be SOL. But fortunately for us, Joffrey reveals that Uriel was a part-time pipe layer and has an illegitimate son named Martin, who lives as a priest in the city of Kvatch. So we head on over to collect our beautiful bastard boy. While we're heading to Kvatch, let's take a look at our menu, which is absolute ass compared to Morrowind's menu. The menu has been broken up into 4 tabs: Stats, Inventory, Spells and Magic, and the Map and Quest Log, which all have sub-tabs under themselves. Your inventory is now in a list-like structure, and by default, item icons and entries are pretty large, which means you'll have to do a lot of scrolling. The map is probably the worst aspect of this menu though, as it only shows a small window of the map that cannot be zoomed or resized on, forcing you to drag your mouse to see the entire map and find quest markers. It's also pretty ass. But at least the menu has some good design to it, with clean and clear icons for all item and spell types, and it all looks really nice. But I definitely recommend a more PC-friendly menu mod, as this current menu is designed for console players, who needed to be able to clearly see what each item is while sitting on their couch looking at their shitty 2006 era TV. So grab that menu mod. As we approach Kvatch, the sky darkens, hysterical citizens warn that the Daedra have destroyed the city, and when we arrive, we see our first Oblivion Gate, the namesake of the game itself. And these gates make a great first impression. The skybox will change to a dark and red Oblivion sky, and the gate's effects look pretty sick, even to this day. Leveled Daedra will patrol near the gate, which makes this scene pretty funny in context, as the whole city is destroyed, but the only Daedra nearby are some stunted scamps milling about. We recruit the Kvatch guards and enter the gate, and the Oblivion gates are super sick. Mehrunes Dagon Plain of Oblivion is this sharp, hellish area, full of lava pools, desecrated corpses, bloody spikes protruding out of the ground, and massive jagged citadels tower over the entire area, and the place is crawling with leveled monsters and Dremora fighters, who look incredibly fucked up in this game, by the way. Your goal in any given Oblivion gate is to find the largest tower, climb up it, and grab the sigil stone to close the gate. So we fight on through hell, and we grab the sigil stone to blow the place up and close the gate. And once you've done that, congratulations. You've already experienced about 90% of what Oblivion gates have to offer. Remember how I said the gates were sick? Well, They're sick for about the first, and maybe second time only, as they're pretty much all the same, beyond around a dozen or so possible different layouts. Entering an Oblivion gate always has you find and fight your way to the tower, ascend it, and grab the sigil stone to close the gate. And 60 gates will spawn for each character through a single playthrough. Now there are strong gameplay reasons to go and close these gates. Sigil stones are super useful in enchanting, especially past level 17, as they can be used to double the power of an enchantment. And you can also find decent weapons and valuable enchanted rings and other such baubles you can sell for some solid cash. But once you've closed your third gate or so, it just becomes a repetitive slog through the now samey hellish citadels and deadlands. These gates could have definitely benefited from some trimming, as I would spend most of my time just looking for a door or a way to enter a tower, and your Oblivion gate excursions will take anywhere from around 15 to 40 minutes, based on how large the map is and how much trouble the enemies give you. On this playthrough, I fully completed the Allies for Bruma quest, which has you closing 6 Oblivion gates outside all of the major cities of Cyrodiil, and I think I've had my life's fill of Oblivion gates by the time I was done with it. Maybe if Oblivion gates had different ways of closing them, or their time to clear was reduced by 5 to 10-ish minutes, it would do a lot of good for these hell portals. But as they stand, I only cleared them when I needed to, and the main quest gives you way more than enough to work with. And when I saw one out on the road, I'd say thanks, but no thanks. But with the gate destroyed, we can clear our way to the church and find Martin, and we tell him about his true parentage and his role in all of this, to which he also says something along the lines of, "That's bullshit." But I believe it, and we can escort him back to the Priory. When we return, we find out that Joffrey has been caught with his pants down by the Mythic Dawn, who attack the place and steal the amulet. Thanks for nothing, bum. But at least we got Martin, so it's not completely over for us. Cue some accidental murder and an arrest, and we head on over to Cloud Ruler Temple, the stronghold of the Blades. It's got some really dope Japanese-inspired Akaviri architecture. Martin gives a rousing speech.
I wanted you to know that I appreciate your welcome here.
And we get our next task to meet up with Baris in the Imperial City to learn more about the Mythic Dawn cult, which involves us getting all 4 volumes of the Mythic Dawn commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes by Mankar Cameron. We get the first 2 copies easily. Strong arm a goofy little Bosmer for the 3rd volume. The Wood Elves in this game look like actual cartoon characters. And we stage a meeting with the cult itself to get the 4th volume, as only members have copies of it. It's a fun little collection of quests that has you scoot around the Imperial City, helping you get real familiar and intimate with it. And once we have all the books, we learn that the first letters of each paragraph points us towards a grave with a glowing map on it. Has nobody noticed this before? It's right outside the Imperial Palace, glowing like it's a damn neon sign. And it points us towards the location of the Mythic Dawn secret club. We head there and infiltrate the cult, and we see Mankar Cameron himself giving a speech to his followers, before he teleports back to his own plane of Oblivion. And it's a pretty cool scene. But I've always had a problem with the Mythic Dawn, though. They're a doomsday cult that is spread across Cyrodiil, and are led by Mankar Cameron, who is a Bosmer? Altmer? Elf, who created the cult after he obtained the Mysterium Xarxes from Mehrunes Dagon himself. The Xarxes being a magical book and Daedric artifact of great power that's allegedly full of dark powers and prophecy. Mankar Cameron is a very mysterious individual, being the bastard son of the usurper king Haemon Cameron and his mistress, the Cameron dynasty being a well-established Bosmeri dynasty that ruled Valenwood for most of its history. But Mankar himself appears as an Altmer in-game, and the explanations for this discrepancy can range anywhere from that he's a more noble Bosmer, Bethesda made him an Altmer so people would take him more seriously, and so he's not the same race as the adoring fan, all the way to him using Mehrunes' razor to retroactively alter his Nimic, aka his true name and nature, to become an Altmer through the power of the Mysterium Xarxes or some shit. None of this is revealed in-game, and I have no clue. Maybe he's none of that and just some unnamed piss elf's bastard son who was given a magical book. Who knows? Regardless, with the Xarxes in hand, he wrote his 4 commentaries on it, which outlines a master plan from Mehrunes Dagon himself, and promises that all those who serve him will go to a paradise upon death. This paradise being Cameron's own personal plane of Oblivion, that he created through the power of the Xarxes. And through their service to his cult, they will be reborn as immortals in a new Dawn Age of Tamriel. The Dawn Age being a non-linear period of time at the creation of Mundus, where the gods were omnipresent in the world and magic flows endlessly. From these commentaries, he was able to grow his cult, and the cult became so widespread and well-established, they were able to wipe out the entire legitimate Septim bloodline in one night, and were able to build 60 Oblivion gates all across Cyrodiil, and they have sleeper agents embedded in every city. And there will be times in the game when an unassuming NPC will reveal themselves as a Mythic Dawn member and attack you. However, people don't just join murderous doomsday cults for no reason. And this is where I feel the Mythic Dawn falls flat. The only reason you want to join this cult is to either go to paradise upon death, or to bring about a new Dawn Age by bringing the Daedric hordes in service of the Daedric god of destruction to run a train on Tamriel. And these are Daedric we're talking about, who are so notoriously evil, they're often described as demons from hell. and I don't think either reason here is a good enough promise to warrant such a lethal loyalty to this cult. The fourth volume of the commentaries does help a little to give the cult a more understandable lens to view them through, as it tells the story of Mehrunes Dagon's creation, telling the story about how Dagon was created in a sort of parallel or alternate version of Tamriel called Lig, which is a whole lore rabbit hole unto itself. And Lig was ruled by the tyrannical Dreg Kings, the Dreg being those weird crab octopus beastmen enemies from Morrowind. Dagon was created as a prince of good and was imbued with hope, and rose up against the Dregs, freeing their slaves and destroying the Ligian tower of Chim El Garjig, and spread his destructive hope all over the world. And it seems that the Dawn want to recreate these events in Tamriel instead. But no matter how many great Michael Kirkbride lore stories we get, unfortunately, we don't get any real deep looks into why the cult members really joined up, or want to serve Mankar and Dagon with their lives, or how well connected and capable they are. And it probably isn't easy to assassinate the Emperor's 3 sons and the Emperor himself in one night. That takes a lot of manpower and planning. And doing all of that in the vague promise of a nondescript paradise of eternal life, and an even more unclear mythical Tamriel doesn't really add up for me. The Mythic Dawn has some pretty interesting ideas and beliefs. Along with the Dagon creation myth, they also believe that Nirn is a plane of Oblivion unto itself, and it's the plane of the missing god Lorkhan. And since Lorkhan is dead in a way, the men in Myr are an occupying force of Mundus, which really belongs to the Daedra, namely Mehrunes Dagon. But in truth, the Mythic Dawn cultists are getting jobbed, being pawns of Mankar Cameron, who himself is a pawn of Mehrunes Dagon. When we reach Mankar's paradise later in the main quest, we meet some Mythic Dawn members who had died and gone to paradise. But instead of eternal life and endless elven pussy to swim in, they'd rather get endlessly tortured and killed by the Daedra there, doomed to a cycle of being reborn, being brutally tortured or killed by the Daedra, dying, and repeat. Maybe this could be fixed if Mankar had more development and dialogue, or if the Mythic Dawn had more NPCs we could talk to really pick their brains about why they joined up. But they only had Terrence Stamp in the booth for a short amount of time, and Mankar only makes a few brief appearances in the entire game. As it stands, the Mythic Dawn is a really interesting idea that is lacking some serious development. And outside of Mankar's screeds we hear in Paradise, and the esoteric at best commentaries themselves, we learn almost nothing about the cult's history, how well connected and established they are, why the Mythic Dawn cultists truly believe what they believe, and apparently all you need to form an empire-destroying cult is to promise an afterlife, and some console command powers to some commoners. But anyway, undercooked cultists aside, after Mankar gives his speech, he takes the Amulet of Kings back to his paradise and disappears. We are then forced before the cult, and I have to sacrifice an Argonian they have prepped for a ritualistic shanking. I shank the lizard, but after I realized I wouldn't be able to get any extra info on the cult or their history from Mankar's daughter, or any of the other unnamed Mythic Dawn goons in this place, I steal the Xarxes and kill every cultist in sight, and return to Martin. Martin figures he may be able to find a way to open a portal to Mankar's paradise using the Xarxes, but he's not quite sure yet. In the meantime, we head to Bruma to deal with even more Mythic Dawn agents. Man, these guys are just fucking everywhere. And once we slaughter them, we return back to Martin, who has made some headway on the portal to paradise. We will need to gather 4 items for this ritual, and the first thing we need is a Daedric artifact. And you can offer him any one of the 15 artifacts you can obtain in the game. And I really like this mission structure, as it not only opens up the game for the player to do any quest they like, but it also forces you to make a choice on which artifact will be destroyed from your save file, as Martin eats that shit up during the ritual. The game points you towards Azura's Star by default, but Azura's Star is one of the more useful artifacts in the game, being an infinitely reusable Grand Soul Gem. So instead, I decided to sacrifice that nasty bitch Namira's ring, as its mild damage and spell reflection was something I could live without. So I help her ugly ruin-dwelling followers to slaughter the priests of Arcade trying to bring them into the light, get the ring, and return to Martin. Man, being a Namira worshipper looks like it sucks ass. We give Martin the ring, and then talk to Joffrey, who tells us an Oblivion gate has opened in front of Bruma, and to go close that joint up right now. It's another standard Oblivion gate crawl, but at least we got my dad, Bird, backing us up. We close the gate and report back to Joffrey, who will start the Allies of Bruma quest I mentioned earlier, which is thankfully optional if you don't feel like clearing out 6 almost identical hell dungeons. But I did it all anyway because I love labor. Your reward for slogging through these gates is a bigger and more colorful friendly army to back you up at the Bruma Mega Gate battle later in the questline. And the extra backup is really nice for keeping the Daedra off you, as well as making the battle feel more epic. Well, as epic as we can get. But it's totally not required, and I feel like most people just jack down the difficulty for this fight anyway, as the leveled Daedra that swarm out of the gate will whoop your allies after a little bit. And remember, getting ganged up on in Oblivion is the worst possible situation to be in. But before we do any of that, we must first get the second ingredient for our ritual, which is the blood of an Aedric god. This is pretty interesting, as despite their reverence among the people of Tamriel, the Aedra are pretty absent from Nirn, and their artifacts are extremely rare, like the Amulet of Kings, which is an artifact of Akatosh. But luckily for us, Martin has a really solid lead on our Adric artifact, that being the armor of Tiber Septim himself, which is held in the bowels of St. Krator. St. Krator is a pretty interesting place lore-wise, being built as a capital city by the slave queen Alessia, being the place where Tiber Septim defeated the Nordic invaders of Cyrodiil, and is also the mythical birthplace of the founder of the Second Empire, the one and only Remen Cyrodiil. But in practice, it's a pretty unremarkable dungeon delve with an interesting gimmick of freeing 4 Blades ghosts who will allow you to enter the inner sanctum and receive Talos' armor. As it seems at some point, Zurin Arctis, aka the Underking, came to St. Krator and took a nasty shit all over the place, filling it with evil spirits and curses. But our ghostly friends ward off the curse, and we snag the armor and return to Martin, who then asks us to obtain a great Welkin stone from an Ayleid ruin, our next ritual ingredient. The Ayleids are this game's obligatory extinct elven race, whose ruins dot the map like the Dwemer ruins that jut out all over Skyrim and Morrowind. And I like their presentation. The Ayleid ruins have this post-apocalyptic high elven architecture, looking like as if you dropped a nuke on Rivendell, which lets them stand out from the technological architecture of the Dwemer. The Ayleids themselves were the original elven inhabitants of Cyrodiil, also known as the Heartland or Wild Elves. The Imperial City itself was originally an Ayleid city, and the Ayleids, much like their Dunmer counterparts, had moved to modern Cyrodiil after schisming with the other Aldmer, over, you can probably guess, Daedra worship. And in Cyrodiil, they built their many elegant cities and were very adept at magic, using Varla and Welkin stones to store and harness magical power. However, as time went on, the Ayleids became more and more tyrannical and sadistic, becoming almost cartoonishly evil, enslaving the humans who had migrated into Cyrodiil, who would revel in torturing their slaves, and even made an art out of human torture and violence, making, quote, flesh sculptures and gut gardens, and would even brutally slaughter children. These guys were Molag Bal and Mehrunes Dagon's strongest soldiers. And as this violent decadence continued, a slave woman who we only know as Alessia made a pact with Akatosh and the other divines to free her people, and he gave her the Amulet of Kings, and she rose up in rebellion against the Ayleids. And this rebellion eventually wiped them all out and drove them into the far wilderness, where their race mostly fizzled out, and their cities fell to ruin, where they remain until we find them in Oblivion. So I cut my way through these buff-ass zombies and skeletons squatting in the ruin, and I grabbed the Welkin stone after another solidly standard dungeon clear. And we return again to Martin, and now it's time for our final ritual ingredient, a great sigil stone. But that means we must let a massive Oblivion gate open in front of Bruma, so we can enter it and grab the sigil stone. So me and the gang all head over to Bruma, and we get this great little moment where we parade through Bruma with Martin, who has donned Talos' armor, and the crowd cheers us on as we go off to fight some well-leveled Daedra. I fight off the Daedra, and with so many friendly NPCs fighting with me, the hardest part of the fight was making sure I didn't accidentally murder anyone. And once the large gates open, we run inside to take on the most unique Oblivion gate in the game, as we have to close in around under 15 minutes, or else the walking siege engine will escape and destroy Bruma. The time limit makes this game way tenser than the other ones, and you may clench your ass a little bit. But it's still just kill the Daedra and touch the stone to win, and that's exactly what we do. And with the sigil stone in hand, we have everything we need to enter Mankar's paradise and end this chicanery for good. We create the portal and enter paradise, and this is probably my favorite part of the entire main quest, as we get some pretty good, but limited lore exposition. Like I mentioned earlier, we find that this paradise isn't all it was cracked up to be, and the Mythic Dawn cultists who died are now indeed immortal, but now they live as fodder for their Daedric overlords, who hunt them for sport and dip them in lava for eternity. Some members are in denial of the reality of the situation, and are coping that this torture is all just a test for the coming Dawn era, but most are completely disillusioned with the cult, and we even get help from the guy who opened the Kvatch gate, which is a great little character moment for a Mythic Dawn member, which is extremely rare, as most members are unnamed NPCs or have nothing interesting to say at all to you. So we go through the Savage Garden, the Torture Cave, and we make it up to Mankar's palace, and the whole time Mankar is speaking to us, giving us interesting lore bits about how Mundus is the Oblivion plane of Lorkhan, but then he makes some weird mistakes, saying that Cold Harbor is the realm of Meridia, when it actually belongs to Molag Bal. That's pretty weird though. Script issue maybe? Anyway, once we reach Mankar's palace, he gloats to us about Dagon's upcoming invasion in his new Dawn era, and he and his 2 shitty kids attack us. But I guess Mankar has gotten pretty lazy after 400 years in paradise, and the dude is a total slouch, and I stagger him to death with my glass longsword, and I take back the Amulet of Kings. We return and find Martin, who has donned his Imperial regalia, looking just like his pops. We give him the amulet and head to the Imperial City, and speak to Chancellor Okado. But as we speak to him, the city is attacked by Mehrunes Dagon himself. So we head outside with Martin, and we dodge some Daedric minions and the big guy himself, and quickly escort him to the Temple of the One, where he then makes the ultimate sacrifice, mantling Akatosh himself to turn into a massive flaming dragon, who gives Dagon a nasty neck bite and destroys his form on Tamriel. However, the burden of mantling Akatosh took everything out of Martin, who strikes an epic pose before he solidifies into rock, marking the true end of the Septim bloodline. But with his sacrifice, the barrier between Oblivion and Tamriel has been permanently closed, and no longer requires the Dragonfires to keep the firmament intact. And with that, that's the end of Oblivion's main quest. We get congratulated by Okado, who gives us a reward of some custom Imperial Dragon armor, which has maybe the longest wait I've ever seen in a game, as you have to wait 2 in-game weeks to get the armor. Damn, that Imperial bureaucracy is nasty. Oblivion's main quest has some pretty great moments, like the attack on Kvatch and the final battle between Martin and Mehrunes in the Imperial City. And these moments have held an impression on this game's fans for over a decade. But the main quest itself is surprisingly short, and is padded by quests like Allies for Bruma to get as much mileage out of it as possible. And outside of those previously mentioned quests, in the Daedric quest, the remaining main quest missions are mostly your standard dungeon crawls. The Mythic Dawn has some interesting beliefs and lore that make you question the nature of Tamriel and the Divines, but the cult itself is far too underdeveloped and vague to leave a lasting impression on players, and they mostly exist to further the plot through some nondescript means. Hell, they even knew Uriel had a bastard son in Kvatch, so unless Mankar was reading the game's script through the power of the Mysterium Xarxes, the Mythic Dawn must be really powerful, really well connected, and must have a vast network of spies and agents that run almost all the way to the top of the Empire. And we never get to learn if that's the case or not, nor do we really learn what compels normal citizens to join up with this cult, beyond your typical reasons of power and eternal life. And there is a woefully small amount of dialogue and lore for the Mythic Dawn members, which leaves me unsatisfied with that part of the story. I enjoyed how the main character of the story was Martin and not the player, and it gives the main quest a pretty unique perspective from the other main quests in the series. And I also really liked how Mehrunes Dagon, in a way, still won the Oblivion Crisis. I mean, sure, he got chomped and exploded off the face of Tamriel, but through his machinations, he had ended the Septim Dynasty and had removed the need for an Amulet of Kings and Dragonfires to keep Tamriel and Oblivion separated. So who knows what that will mean for Daedric mortal interactions in the future. And it's very interesting to speculate on if this was his true plan, or if he actually wanted to conquer all of Tamriel like Mankar claims. Overall, the story is a mixed bag of some high highs and some pretty undercooked lows. But the shortness of this main quest is supplemented by 5 factions with full quest lines for each, minus the arena, which is like half of a faction, rather than a complete one like the Dark Brotherhood. I won't be going into detail about all the factions, as again, we'd literally be here all day, but I'll go over them in more broader strokes, as they all, minus the arena of course, try to tell a self-contained and interesting story that highlights the strengths of each faction class alignment. I'd go more into depth with these factions if I made an Elder Scrolls factions focused video. We'll see. But anyway, first up is the arena, as it's likely the first faction you'll join. It's a great place to get some early game skill training and money, and it's really close to where you're birthed out of the Imperial sewers and into the open world. But it's pretty unremarkable, being a series of battles where you ethnically cleanse the yellow team. Not much to write home about, but it's easy to join and get fighting in right away, and I'm glad it's a feature at all. It makes the Imperial City feel more alive and believable. Next up is the Fighters Guild, and it's your expected mercenary work, and kicks off a questline with a fun reversal of Morrowind's first Fighters Guild quest. It was probably the most underwhelming faction not called the Arena, and has a pretty rushed story about combating the Blackwood Company and their lethal business practices. And you even end up tripping balls on his sap and slaughter an entire village of civilians thinking that they're goblins. But the story falls flat towards the end, and it takes 2 morally gray factions and turns it into a more generic good mercenary company versus an evil mercenary company story. Next we got the Mages Guild, which is essential for any magic-focused character, as spellcrafting and the best magic resources and trainers are locked behind getting 6 recommendations from each city guild hall after a short quest for each of them, which then expands into a bigger plot about fighting a faction of necromancers, who are growing in power after the Arcane University had banned necromancy. And it's probably not a good idea to prohibit your magical monopoly from using such powerful magic. You're just opening the door to get challenged by a group of mages who do use necromancy. Probably not the best idea. And you even end up scrapping with the legendary necromancer King Mana Marco, who in this game is an absolute bum, who can only cast a handful of spells before he runs out of magicka. Bro came back absolutely washed. Next up is the Thieves Guild, which is a bit more Robin Hood than Robin the Hood, but it's got some really awesome plot hooks like the Grey Fox and the Grey Cowl of Nocturnal, which is a Daedric artifact that erases your existence when you put it on. Even if you put it on right in front of somebody else, they would immediately forget who you are and would only know you as the Grey Fox. And this questline will have you do some actual thievery to progress in the faction, and it all leads up to the heist of an Elder Scroll. Hey, that's the name of the game. Lastly, we got the Dark Brotherhood, and it's probably the most famous faction in Oblivion for some obvious reasons. It's full of interesting quests and twists, from killing off a party of people all locked in the same house together one by one, to killing off your entire Dark Brotherhood sanctuary, and trying to figure out the identity of a traitor who is offing Dark Brotherhood leaders, which it turns out was you all along. It's got the most tonally unique story with the highest stakes, and is carried by Wes Johnson's buttery smooth Lucien Lachance performance. The dude's having a blast with it, and you can tell. These factions provide hours and hours of quests that you can lose days to, and they're the real meat of Oblivion outside of the main quest. and each quest from each faction at least tries to give you an interesting scenario with each quest. And some of the quests remain as some of the most highly regarded Elder Scrolls quests to this day, although some factions pull off their stories a little bit better than others. Like I said, I'd have to make a video dedicated to the factions to cover everything, unless I want to inflate this video to patrician TV lengths. But with that, that's most of the base game Oblivion content covered, so now it's time to take a look at the major expansions. Oblivion has several download packs, like Mehrunes Razor, Frostcrack Spire, the Vile Lair, and of course, Horse Armor. This is where it all went wrong. But the only two DLCs with enough meat to be considered expansions are the Knights of the Nine and the Shivering Isles. So let's take a look at the Knights of the Nine first, as it's much shorter. The Knights of the Nine is a collection of quests to recover the relics of the Divine Crusader, Pelinal Whitestrake. Pelinal himself was a knight who fought alongside Alessia and her winged Minotaur boyfriend, and son of the divine Kinnereth, Morehouse, who Pelinal shared an uncle and nephew type relationship with. But Pelinal is more than just some strong knight. This dude was more like a goddamn Terminator, which I like to think is a reference to Bethesda's earlier Terminator PC games, and I'm pretty sure Kirkbride even said he's a Terminator reference. Pelinal Whitestrake's true nature is unknown, as some claim he may have been a god in human form, an honest Akatosh cyborg with a laser for an arm, or maybe even the Shezarene, the mortal reincarnation of the god Lorkhan, known as Shazar by the Cyrodiilians. However, he hated any talk of him being a god, and the man who suggested that he was the Shezarene was smothered by moths. And when the Nords joined in on Alessia's rebellion, they took one look at Pelinal and said that he was Shor, who was the Nordic version of Lorkhan, reborn. To which Pelinal spat at their feet for such nasty heresy, and led them anyway. Humble guy. According to legend, he had no heart, just having a red amulet and a hole in his chest, and he was probably a time traveler. As he spoke unlike the other humans of the time, he wore some weird armor that he himself admitted was unlike any other armor ever made. And one time, after he killed an Ayleid king and was devouring the veins in his neck, he screamed out praise for someone named Remen, who we know is the future founder of the Second Empire, but had not even been born yet. Pelinal had ascended levels of racism against elves. He spent most of his time baiting Ayleid kings to fight him in combat, and they always would accept due to their elven arrogance. Then Pelinal would brutally slaughter them with his overwhelming power, and then would usually cannibalize or drink the blood of the Ayleid king's body. Pelinal later became a general of Alessia's armies after he heard about some upstart humans trying to overthrow their elven overlords, and he applied to join her army by entering her camp with his armor and weapons stained with elven gore, and smashed off Ayleid faces encrusted on his divine mace. He exterminated elves everywhere he went, sacking Ayleid cities and killing so many elves, his hair eventually turned from white to brown from being stained by elven blood, despite wearing a gray helm into battle. And if he got a little too excited, he'd sometimes fly into an unstoppable rage, mindlessly killing any elves he saw, and even destroying the very land around him with his raw power. In one particular rage session, he wandered into Elsewhere and came across the Khajiit, who he thought were another form of elf, probably from their big pointed ears, and he went on a killing spree of the poor cats until the Khajiit summoned their version of Akatosh, who literally blew him out of Elsewhere with his divine breath. These slaughter geek sessions could only be stopped by Alessia herself, who had to pray and make sacrifices to the gods to calm him down, as even the gods were a little uncomfortable with his mass murder, and they had to combine all of their powers just to soothe his gamer anger. However, Pelinal met his end when he fought the Ayleid's strongest lord, Umaril the Unfeathered, a powerful Ayleid sorcerer king who may have been the son of a divine, and is also the Daedric Prince Meridia's living champion. Near the end of the Alessian Rebellion, when her troops had reached the White Gold Tower, Umaril challenged Pelinal, and then immediately bitched out and summoned shock Atronachs to weaken him. Pelinal killed the Atronachs, but was weakened a bit. And when he faced Umaril, he powered through his wounds and seemingly killed him. But once Umaril was defeated, his remaining generals descended on Pelinal and cut him into 8 pieces. But when Morehouse arrived inside the tower later, Pelinal's head was still alive, and they had one last uncle-nephew conversation before Pelinal died for good. But thanks to his efforts, his defeat of Umaril had allowed the Alessians to capture the White Gold Tower, marking the true beginning of the end for the Ayleids. But it seems that Umaril had somehow survived his ancient battle, and has returned to Cyrodiil to get his lick back against those bitch-ass divines of Alessia, which is where we start Knights of the Nine, as Umaril launches an attack on the Anvil Chapel. Now that's a pretty sick backstory for this expansion. Shit, you're telling me we're gonna find the armor and weapons of a time-traveling cyborg living god who ate elven necks for breakfast? Well, unfortunately, Pelinal only makes one brief appearance, as after we speak to the prophet who kicks off the quest, and we visit all the shrines of the 9 divines across Cyrodiil. Oblivion loves starting quests with a checklist. We meet Pelinal's spirit in the sky, and he warns us of Umaril's return, and he tells us that we need to destroy that pesky knife ear once and for all. But once we're done chatting with Pelinal, he's completely absent from the rest of the quest line. Instead, this expansion's story focuses more on the previous incarnation of the Knights of the Nine, who had gathered the armor pieces and weapons of Pelinal, but had fallen out with each other, and now the relics that they had gathered had all become lost or cursed. we are pointed to an underwater alien ruin by Pellinol, where we can find Sir Emil's corpse, his ring, and we find the helm of the Crusader once we clear the ruin. And once we're out, we head on over to the Priory of the Nine, our new headquarters for this expansion. We use the ring to open a floor mural and head to the Undercroft, where we have to fight the ghosts of the previous Knights of the Nine in sequence to prove our worth and all that good shit. We give these fools a real working, and we get the cures. The Knights of the Nine faction itself has a bit of a similar problem to the Mythic Dawn, as their faction is pretty undercooked lore-wise compared to Pellinol, and they mostly exist as fluff to drive the small stories for each quest. And the ghosts themselves are not all that interesting to me. Give me more of the genocidal Terminator living god knight rather than these wash posers. And from here, we have to gather the rest of the armor pieces, and Pellinol's shield, sword, and mace. And first off, we have to free the descendant of one of the original knights from a fatigue-draining curse placed on him by Pellinol's gauntlets. And this quest seems quite cool, but it's very simple. You just have to have a few conversations before deciding to take the curse on yourself, which allows you to grab the gauntlets. We can get his shield at the end of a dungeon with 3, count them, 3, straightforward trial and error puzzles. We can get the boots from a Kinnereth shrine, which unlocks after we let a bear maul our ass for a few seconds. And with the boots, we can get the mace in this weird void realm we access from a tomb, and the boots will build us a magical bridge to clear the gap to the mace. But once we move to leave the mace chapel, we get attacked by Aurorans for the first time. These guys being the Daedric minions of Meridia, and they've got some pretty highly detailed models for Oblivion, and I really like the look of these guys. But we slaughter them easily, and we can return to the chapel to get the Greaves, as a friendly NPC will show up to hand them off to us. Hey, thanks for saving me the trip, bro. And while you're out doing these quests, you'll be pulling in a ton of new recruits to your reborn Knights of the Nine faction, mostly characters you've met during the relic retrieval quests, which is a cool touch, but this is all happening a bit too fast. I did 2 dungeon delves and now I gotta line out the door if people wanted to join up with my faction that was started 3 days ago. And finally, we can find Pellinol's sword in another dungeon, and a really scary ghost is wielding it. So we kill the ghost and take his nasty ass tainted sword, and we cleanse it at Stendarr's chapel before we fight off another Auroran terrorist attack. Once we cleanse the sword, we return to the chapel, where Wes Johnson character 3901 shows up to give an epic speech to my knights, and he gives me a unique effect called the Blessing of Talos, which will allow me to follow Umaril into Oblivion, so I can kill his ass for good. We can find him shacked up in his desolate alien ruin of Garlus Malatar, and we assault the place with our Knights of the Nine. And it's a pretty standard alien ruin that's filled with Aurorans, and we have to disable their magic energy ball to weaken them, and make our way to Umaril, who we find in the back of the dungeon. Umaril has a really cool design, being this yellow, tall, elegantly armored alien, and I can't even tell what is a part of his actual body and what's part of his armor. And he's pretty damn imposing as well. That face just kind of unsettles me. But these looks are deceiving, and if you're decked out in your Pellinol armor and weapons, which you most likely are for, lore purposes, Umaril is just a complete pushover. Pellinol's gear debuffs Umaril pretty hard, and I was able to whoop his ass by bullying him into a corner, just as Pellinol intended. However, it's not over yet, and we have to cast Talos' blessing to chase Umaril into the sky above the Imperial City. And this is probably the coolest arena for a fight in the entire game. 2 ascended beings fighting in the sky over the very tower Umaril used to rule. But in reality, it's just round 2 of the already easy fight, and I absolutely son Umaril by knocking his sword out of his hand, and finally avenging Goat. Once he's dead, we start falling, and then we wake back up in the chapel, and we learn that we were carried back there after we chased Umaril into the sky, as our body on Tamriel locked up and stopped moving for several days before waking back up in the Undercroft. And with that, Knights of the Nine is complete. Literally, the faction just sort of stops functioning after we kill Umaril, and your loyal knights will just stand around until you recruit them to follow you, making things a bit awkward around the chapel. These guys literally have nothing to do. But overall, Knights of the Nine is a fun little questline with some dungeons with a few unique gimmicks, like the puzzle trifecta in the final dungeon with the powered-up Aurorans. And it's worth doing just to meet Pellinol and to get his relics alone. And I love how the Crusader armor looks. It's probably my favorite armor set in Oblivion, and I wore it for the rest of my playthrough. However, the story is very undercooked, and functions more as window dressing around the quests, rather than feeling like a complete, legitimate faction. I really wished it focused more on the awesome lore of Pellinol Whitestrake, and I wish we could have had more than just one conversation with or about him. And all of the lore I mentioned before is not conveyed to you during the questline, and you rather have to read the Song of Pellinol book added by this expansion, which is very easily missable in normal gameplay. Umaril has some awesome lore and a really cool design, but he also has no real plan. All he does is order 3 terrorist attacks on Chapels of the Divines, and just waits in his ruin for us to arrive and whoop his ass twice. I mean, we're talking about the former Sorcerer King of the Aliads, whose father was a Divine, and is also the living champion of Meridia. and I feel like Umarill would have much grander plans to restore his lost kingdoms and to fight back against the Imperials living on his former homeland, rather than just some small-scale attacks. And I wish the quests were based more around the mythical history of the Alessian Rebellion, rather than the comparatively less interesting failed incarnation of the Knights of the Nine. But with that, we can move on to Oblivion's only true proper expansion, the Shivering Isles. Widely regarded as one of, if not the best expansion in Elder Scrolls history, the Shivering Isles takes us to Sheogorath's Plane of Oblivion, the Shivering Isles, which we can enter via a strange three-faced door that appears on an island in the Nibene Bay. When we approach, we see a Dummer run out of the door, raving about how insane the place is, before attacking us and a nearby guard who we kill. We then hear Shio ranting about his most recent failure, and invites us to step inside his mouth door. Sheogorath is voiced by Wes Johnson, who also voices half of Cyrodiil's population. But jokes aside, Wes absolutely kills it in his role as Sheogorath. His wit and energy are just awesome. You can tell he's just having the time of his life reading out these lines, and I'm pretty sure he's the literal loudest character in the entire game.
Cheese for everyone!
When we enter the mouth to find something a little unexpected, we are greeted by an odd but well-dressed man sitting at a table with a metronome on it. He asks us to sit, which I can't for some reason. Weird. The hero of Kvatch is looking at this chair like it's some unknown contraption. Apparently, this is an issue caused by the Knights of the Nine, and it happens after you defeat Umarill, which will break your ability to sit down for the rest of the game. Something to do with an animation bug. I tried sitting in Sheogorath's throne at the end of the expansion, but even that didn't work. Classic Oblivion. Speaking of bugs, I fortunately never ran into any quest-breaking bugs, but I did have a handful of crashes, and had one major bug when doing Sheogorath's Daedric quest, as all of Sheo's lines were instantly skipped when I spoke to his statue. But I think that may have been a conflict between my base unofficial patch mod and an unofficial patch for the Shivering Isles. But besides these issues, most of the bugs are purely visual, which just makes Oblivion funnier for me, so they're no big deal at all. But definitely download the unofficial patches for your game as well. They'll only make your experience better. But back to the impossible chair. Luckily for me, this bug is just visual, and we can still talk to Haskill to start the expansion proper. Haskill is another great character with some great voice acting. Haskill is Sheogorath's chamberlain and manservant, and is at the end of his rope with the Mad God shenanigans. He's fully loyal to Sheogorath, but is incredibly cynical and cheeky, and his dour responses to being summoned against his will to help us were really funny to me. This dude is just gold.
Our Lord has granted you the power to summon me. How wonderful for me.
And the voice acting is excellent. You can really tell he's damn near fed up just based on the voice performance alone. Since when was Elder Scrolls acting this good? Anyway, Haskill tells us that Sheogorath is looking for a mortal champion, and we agree to see what he wants, and we get the step-out moment that's better than the base game, as butterflies appear everywhere and melt the room that we were in, revealing the mushroomed, ruin-strewn Shivering Isles, and it's an awesome first impression. The start of this DLC is incredibly solid and interesting. And once we're set loose into the Isles, our first goal is to eliminate this flesh abomination and seemingly unkillable gatekeeper, who is guarding the doors to the two areas of the map, Mania and Dementia. We can speak to the locals to figure out how to get past the gatekeeper, and the citizens we talk to are just as kooky as their lord, wearing some weird but unique noble clothes, and have some odd trains of thought.
Watch for the elytra stingers. Their poison can be deadly. They don't like magic much, though. I amaze me.
The setting of the Shivering Isles really let Bethesda go nuts with these weird and unique NPCs, and everyone here will have something interesting or crazy to say, or something crazy for us to do, like helping this guy commit suicide.
What?
Or helping this guy find a place to sleep outside because his walls are too loud. And it's not complete batshit in-your-face insanity. Well, mostly. But rather, the NPCs have completely illogical problems and illogical solutions to said problems. It strikes a nice balance that makes the NPCs feel genuine, yet not too overly ridiculous. And from asking around, we can learn either one of two ways to take down the gatekeeper. We can either help this Nord who talks to Bones to help him gather bones from a nearby dungeon to attack the gatekeeper with, or we can get some info from Nanette to follow the gatekeeper's creator and mother, Relmina Verenim, who visits the gatekeeper every night at midnight and cries at the sight of him, her tears being lethal poison to him. So I decided to get the tears, as it has a more interesting setup, and it's pretty creepy and fascinating to watch this lady cry for her demented flesh child monster. And I wasn't really vibing with the Bone Man here, so I shadow her to the gatekeeper and get her tears from a dropped handkerchief. And I used the tears as a poison for my blade to kill the gatekeeper. And this is a great quest to start, with an interesting player choice on how to defeat the gatekeeper, and I really enjoyed the demented lore of this Dunmer lady popping out that fucking thing, and it sets a really solid bar for subsequent quests. With the gatekeeper dead, we can enter the Isles proper. We can either go to the northern side of Mania, or to the southern side of Dementia, being the two main aspects of Sheogorath's madness. Mania is a bright orange and yellow tinted area that represents Sheogorath's love for creativity, art, and energy, and is patrolled by the Golden Saints, whereas Dementia is a darker, green-tinted area that represents the violent and dark sides of madness, like paranoia, violence, and hatred, and is patrolled by the Dark Seducers. They feel distinct from each other, and are a great way of visualizing the duality of Sheogorath's mind, the manic highs, and the demented lows. And we head on over to New Sheoth, where the big man's palace is located. We enter the palace and speak to the Mad God himself, and we get more great voice acting. Sheogorath says that the Grey March is coming, but he refuses to elaborate on what that is. But now there's no time to talk, and Shio asks us to go clear out Zendilion, a former torture chamber that Shio used as entertainment, which is now overrun with these fish monsters called the Grummites. So I clear the dungeon of these block-happy bastards, and when we're done, we meet the manager of the place, who lets us torture a group of Avengers that just happened to wander in. And we can torture them by pushing some buttons and watching what happens to them. You can only either choose to mind break or kill the adventurers, but it's a great little moment that reinforces the violent insanity of Sheogorath, and you can just tell the devs are having fun with it. Once I mindfuck this party, we can get the weapon Dawnfang Duskfang from the Orc, and this weapon is pretty sweet. It changes between the two versions of the sword based on the time of day, and it has an incredibly unique design, and can be powered up by killing 14 enemies. And the best part? Its enchantment refreshes when the sword changes, which is huge for a game with recharges this expensive. But before we leave, we're attacked by some strange crystalline knights, who we learn are the Knights of Order. Probably has something to do with that Grey March Shio mentioned, so we return to him. Shio then reveals that the Grey March and these crystal knights are the doing of the Daedric Prince of Order, Jiggalag. Jiggalag is Sheogorath's complete opposite, and has come to bring order to this wacky shithole. But he then tells us to ignore all that shit, and he tells us to get acclimated with the Shivering Isles by helping the Duke of Mania and the Duchess of Dementia with their problems. I first helped the Duchess, who has a wild-looking dress, and she suspects that there is a conspiracy in motion to kill her, and she sends us all over the Dementia Palace and the town of Crucible looking for the conspiracists, and we get to take her torturer with us to interrogate the NPCs. And this guy was my favorite part of the quest. It's hilarious to sick this guy on the person you're questioning so he can shock torture them. It's great.
Please, no!
And after a somewhat lengthy investigation, the conspiracists turn out to be a Khajiit and the Duchess's head of guard, who are both working for an Altmer named Marine, who wants the Duchess dead for fucking the Duke of Mania on the down low, which we can't be having. So we narc on her to the Duchess, who then executes Marine with shock magic. It's a bit drawn out of an investigation, but this quest is a great opportunity to meet the freaks and geeks of Crucible, and torturing people was hilarious. But with that, we next have to help the Duke of Dementia, who wants us to get him the Chalice of Reversal from an Elytra den so he can cure his Feldu addiction. And this dungeon was probably the most difficult dungeon I went through in the entire game, as it's got an interesting mechanic where you have to eat Feldu to enter, and you have to kill the green glowing Elytra to get more Feldu, as after a short amount of time, you'll get hit with Feldu withdrawal that debuffs your character pretty hard. So it becomes a pretty intense race to find and kill the next green Elytra to get your fix. And this dungeon is pretty damn big, probably being the biggest dungeon I've come across so far, with multiple areas of maze-like tunnels. Many of the Shivering Isles dungeons feel pretty large and complex, compared to the base game at least. But it's also tough due to the Elytra themselves, who are pretty tanky bugs who love to block your attacks and stagger you. And there isn't much visual communication that the bugs are blocking, and my sword was bouncing off these guys while they were doing their idle animations. But besides this blocking frustration, this is a great and properly challenging dungeon, and has a great end where you slaughter these Feldu tweakers and steal the chalice back, which we return to the Duke. We then go back to Uncle Shio, who tells us that he wants us to stop the Grey March, and to do so, we must mantle Sheogorath and take his place as the Mad God of the Shivering Isles. And our next step is to go lay ourselves on fire and light the New Sheoth Great Torch to inspire the local citizens. So we head to Cylorn and are offered a choice to fight with either the Golden Saints or the Dark Seducers to wipe out the other side in the dungeon. and I chose the Golden Saints because I think they're hotter. Some of these seducers look a little smashed. We fight through the seducers and light the flame. We then set ourselves on fire with it and run back to New Sheoth. You can then choose to either light the Mania or the Dementia Torch for a different raiment reward. The Shivering Isles is full of this or that quest choices, and although they're binary between Mania and Dementia most times, I commend the devs for giving almost every quest a choice to make. Next, we talk to Shio again, who tells us that we need to either replace the current Duke or Duchess by killing them, ripping out their heart, and using it in a ritual to make ourselves Duke. And I decided to take out the Duchess because I like the Duke of Mania's funny hat. And to find her, we have to get a key from her Redguard steward to hunt her down through some secret tunnels. And the dungeon to find her was longer than I thought it would be. And we find her at the end, where she attacks us with her 2 seducer bodyguards. And oh god no, another group fight. And this was a very tough fight for me, mostly due to the overlapping blocking enemies. But I do my group battle method of taking pot-shot swings and then running away. And I eventually take her ass down and scoop out her heart. And I use it in the ritual to make myself Duke of Dementia. And as we do the ritual, the Duke of Mania runs in and swears vengeance on us for killing his sneaky Link. And he runs off to go join up with Jigalag, who is currently thrashing the Fringe. And we have to go stop his assault. So we head there and find the place got hit with an order bomb. And we have to join up with our Dark Seducer soldiers to fight off the Knights. And then we have to clear a dungeon and destroy an Order Crystal to stop the Order Knights from spawning in. And it's another really solid quest that immediately sets the stakes super high, as the Grey March isn't just coming. That shit is here. It's do or die time. And after that, we return to Shio, who tells us to rebuild the Gatekeeper with Romina's help, who we can find in her torture dungeon. She tells us to go get 4 ingredients from the Gardens of Flesh and Bone, so we get those components in another dungeon clearing, and we return to Relmina to select our Gatekeeper body parts, and perform the ritual to build him. And it's another great little moment. I love this demented magic on display to birth this fucked up meat child. And once the Gatekeeper has been reborn, we help out the Golden Saints defeat some Knights of Order who have clogged up their wellspring, which prevents them from returning to the Shivering Isles after dying. So I cut down an order of Legion goons, and I free the wellspring, and we get a Golden Saint armor set for our troubles, which is a pretty sweet reward, but his armor kind of looks like shit on male characters. So I'll put that, yeah, right there. We return to Sheogorath again, who talks about how over it is for him, and that the Grey March has come, and that we're too late. And then he then grows in size and vanishes. You see, Sheogorath and Jigalag are the same person. Jigalag was an incredibly powerful Daedric prince, and spread his gray, lifeless, crystalline order wherever he went. And he even had a massive library that used Jig's cold logic to predict all future events with incredible accuracy. Jigalag's desire for complete order and domination compelled him to spread his order out of his own realm, and he started encroaching on the realms of other Daedric princes, which made them all shit bricks in fear. So, in a completely unprecedented move, all of the Daedric princes managed to band together to use their collective power to curse Jigalag into becoming his pure opposite, the Daedric Prince of Madness, Sheogorath. However, this curse comes with an asterisk, as at the end of every Tamrielic era, the Grey March begins, and Sheogorath turns back into Jigalag, and destroys his own realm, and then reverts back into Sheogorath, who then rebuilds the realm again until the Grey March starts in an endless cycle. However, our presence is a new factor in this cycle, and Haskell says we may still be able to stop Jigalag if we can assume Shio's throne and craft a new Staff of Sheogorath for ourselves. And to learn more, he points us toward Knife Point Hollow, and behind a locked door in there we find Daius, Haskell's counterpart that used to work for Jigalag. And he's another incredibly interesting character, being the former keeper of Jigalag's future-telling library, imprisoned for eternity by Sheogorath, as even Shio himself couldn't bring himself to kill him and fully destroy the library of Jigalag. He tells us that we first need the Eye of Sirta, a woman who survived the last Grey March, and he also tells us to get a branch from the Tree of Shades, but the tree won't pass us a branch until we prove ourselves to it. So I first head to Sirta's hideout, which is filled with her apostles. And there's a whole subquest you can do to work with the apostles who will help you get rid of Sirta. But I said fuck all that and just killed everyone I saw. And I kill Sirta and steal her eye to complete the first step of this quest. Next we head to the Tree of Shades, who summons a shadow version of yourself to fight. Whoa, we got our own Elder Scrolls Dark Link fight. Damn, my character's a real bastard. Since when did I have this much health? It's a pretty hard fight, and I was only able to take down my shadow clone after I pulled off a lucky paralyzing power strike. But now we can return to Daius and craft our staff. And all that's left is to dip it into the Font of Madness, but unfortunately, the font is clogged by Order again, so we have to enter the dungeon beneath Sheogorath's throne to kill the Order priests and knights to clear the font. This dungeon has a mechanic where wandering non-hostile gnarls will remove Order barriers, but it's a pretty pointless mechanic. There isn't any strategy or puzzle solving to remove the barriers, and these gnarls will just kind of wander aimlessly and open the doors when they feel like it. But once we reach the Fountainhead, we kill off the Priests of Order, and we even summarily execute Duke Thaden for his treason. We can then return to power up the staff in the now unclogged font, but the forces of Order are literally right at our doorstep, and we step outside to battle them. Unfortunately, for a final battle, it's very underwhelming. You just shut down 2 order crystals before taking on Jiggalag himself, but old Jiggy isn't too much of a threat. He did get me pretty low on health, but I was still able to whoop his ass pretty quickly regardless. And once he's down, he gives up, and we speak to his floating head. And he says that he's tired of the Grey March cycle as well, and every time he completed his conquest of the Shivering Isles, he'd just morph back into Sheogorath, leaving him back at square one. But now that we have the staff and have effectively mantled Sheogorath, Jiglag says that he will let us take his place as Sheo, and he leaves to go spray his order all over the neck, chest, and throats of Oblivion. And for our victory, we become the ruler of the Isles, and we get Sheogorath's sweet drip. And with that, that's the end of the main quest of the Shivering Isles complete. It's true. It's a great expansion. Shocking, I know. The Isles themselves have some great designs and settings, and the Mania-Dementia dichotomy works really well not only as a way to make the Isles more visually interesting, but also reflects the psyche of Sheogorath in a very natural way. There's a lot of substance to each quest, and the dungeons here feel noticeably longer and more complex than most base game dungeons, and almost every quest presents you with a choice to make, whether that be how to kill the Gatekeeper, which Duke to kill, and it's very, very much appreciated. It's also full of great performances, and the NPCs and their side quests are almost always interesting and entertaining, and it feels like everyone involved in making this was just having a blast with it, and the expansion is much better off for it. My only complaints with this expansion would be that some of the quests can drag on a bit longer than I'd like the Duchess Conspiracy quest, and the final battle is a bit underwhelming. But besides that, there's really not much to complain about here. The Shivering Isles is almost a perfect extension of Oblivion. Its bizarre lore, characters, and landscapes are exactly what this game needed, and I completely understand why it's so beloved. Nice job, fellas. But with that, that's all the major Oblivion content I wanted to take a look at today. So, is Oblivion still worth playing today? Well, with a few mods and knowledge on how to counter the fuck-ass leveling system, it absolutely is. It may not have the alien world and mechanical robustness of Morrowind, or the refined combat and modern feel of Skyrim, but Oblivion still has a lot to love. And for 2006, this game is beyond impressive in its scope and systems. There is a metric shit ton of faction, main, and side quests to spend days completing, and some of the quest lines like the Dark Brotherhood, the Thieves Guild, and the Shivering Isles are still considered some of the best work in Elder Scrolls franchise history, and this game was able to scratch that itch only the Elder Scrolls can. And I was in a flow state of questing, grinding my skills, and getting better weapons and gear for a long time while playing this game. And if any game can get me in that state, it has succeeded. Oblivion can be extremely rough around the edges, with its limited voice acting that gives every elf in Cyrodiil the same voice, and characters so ugly they're offensive to even look at. And the melee combat can feel like you're fighting against a group of evil trampolines at times, but the core experience here is still pretty great, sort of like a dirty gem. Oblivion is like a diamond covered in a crust of dubious grime, but regardless, it's still a diamond at its core, and is an obvious must-play for any Elder Scrolls fan. But you probably have already played it. It's Oblivion we're talking about. But that's all I got for you today, and hopefully I can get this done by Friday? We'll see. And I thank you all very much for watching, because I enjoyed you watching this. Goodbye.